welcome to the TRT World 2020 Forum. You're now entering the session for energy and security in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Libyan conflict. This is a very, very important session when we look at the relevance of the issue and how many countries are involved regarding this issue. Every country from Italy to Greece, Turkey, Cyprus, Israel, Lebanon, also North African countries, Egypt, Libya. So a very, very important session. We have some very valuable guests with us and also distinguished discussants to hash out this topic. So we're going to have about 90 minutes to sit down and discuss all the issues that are pertaining to this very important geopolitical topic. Now, I want to introduce our panelists very first. Mustafa Abushagur, former Deputy Prime Minister of Libya. Thank you for joining us, Your Excellency. We also have Peter Millett,
very welcome.
Former High Commissioner. Hi, how are you doing, Mr. Abushagur? We also have Peter Millett, former High Commissioner of the UK to Cyprus and Ambassador to Libya and Jordan. Thank you, Mr. Millett, for joining us.
Pleasure.
And Nikolaus Meyer-Landrut, member of the delegation of the European Union to Turkey. Thank you for joining us, Nikolaus. We were also supposed to have Turkish presidential spokesman and top advisor Ibrahim Cullen with us today, but unfortunately he had a very urgent meeting and he had to cancel last minute. But we have an equally valuable guest with us today, Mr. Egemen Bağış, former Minister of EU Affairs and also current ambassador to the Czech Republic. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Bağış.
Thank you for having me. I'll try my best.
I'm sure you will, sir. Now, let's begin. Let's begin with the Libyan conflict. We have a very important guest, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Libya, and Libya has been very, very central to what's going on in the Eastern Mediterranean. A very important maritime accord signed just a little over a year ago, I believe, November 29th, 2019. And we've seen Libya change from the assault that Khalifa Haftar and the LNA launched on Tripoli back in April of 2019 to the current state right now where we have some very healthy diplomatic dialogue. So I want to give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Mustafa Abushagur, so he can sit down and tell us a little about Libya.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. Unfortunately, Libya over the last 6-7 years has been in a continuous conflict. And unfortunately, most of the time, it's not a political, but also it is a military conflict. And this is, unfortunately, has been supported by a number of regional countries who they have intervened in Libya by supporting some of the conflicting factions and especially supporting Mr. Khalifa Haftar by weapons, by mercenaries, and so on. And of course, this has been culminated, as you mentioned, in April 2019 with the assault on Tripoli, which lasted almost a year and resulted in the killing of thousands of Libyans, the destruction of the infrastructures of hospitals, and of course, thousands of people they have been killed, and more than 100,000 has been displaced, and unfortunately, that continued for almost a year. And people in Tripoli, in the largest greater Tripoli area, has been living literally through hell during the time where there is no safe place to hide from those rockets and missiles who they are falling in their homes, and they're seeing their children have been killed. And until when the intervention and the help came from the Turkish government to the government of national accord and ended that assault and finished that, of course, that we came into a ceasefire kind of agreement. But of course, the conflict really did not end because there was countries who they have intervened, who they have brought mercenaries, who they have brought their own military people to fight in Libya. a lot of them, they're still there. And some of those mercenaries, they're still entrenched in the country, especially in the middle of the country, in Jufra, and also in some of the, especially with the Russian vanguard mercenaries, and also taking over some of the oil fields. So clearly the conflict right now, every time the United Nations and other nations who they are interested to see a stability in Libya, they tried to overcome in this conflict. And recently there was some, I would say, some kind of healthy actions going on by the dialogue that's going on in Tunisia, by the members of the parliament who finally they decided that this is maybe something they will be intervened, and they have met in Morocco. But of course, there's a lot of questions which we might come on to discuss with them along the way. So Libya still is not out of the woods. It's still in a position that can erupt at any moment, unfortunately. And of course, there is a lot of serious challenges that are happening there. Now, when it comes to the Mediterranean, clearly Libya plays a very major role. It's a country with probably the largest coast on the Mediterranean. And the conflict in Libya clearly will spread instability in the whole region. And in order for the Middle East and Mediterranean to see some stability, some peace, clearly Libya has to become, get to the point where become some peaceful means in there. And this will not happen unless those countries who they are continuously intervening and spoiling every position, every possibility of getting an agreement to get out from Libya, and let the Libyans discuss their issues and let the Libyans take control of their country. And then if we can get to that point, there might be a possibility of being able to have a maybe finally peace, which is badly needed in the country.
Thank you very much. I'm going to open the floor up to the discussants after each one of our panelists have their 5 minutes to talk about their respective expertise topics. And also, before I open the floor, I just want to ask this question now, but I'll have you answer later. I'm going to ask each one of our panelists, what type of impact do they expect President-elect Joe Biden to have in Libya and the Eastern Mediterranean as well? But we're going to move on to Peter Millett first, former High Commissioner to the UK, of the UK to Cyprus, and Ambassador to Libya and Jordan, two very important countries, Libya and Cyprus, you were in during your tenure. And I would actually like to hear a little about Cyprus, because Cyprus is very, very important in the Eastern Mediterranean equation and calculations. A very important election just happened in the north. Now there's talk of a two-state solution. There's obviously tensions with Turkey because of maritime jurisdiction as well. So let's get your take on this issue and any other topics that you want to talk about within the scope of the Eastern Mediterranean.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to join you. And yes, I'd like to say a few words about Libya and then a few words about Cyprus as well, and connecting the two. As far as Libya is concerned, I agree with Mustafa Abushagur. I think there's been some very positive steps in the last few months. The ceasefire, the political talks, the increase in oil production. But I think that progress is very fragile. The ceasefire, for example, has not yet been implemented. The troops haven't gone to barracks. None of the foreign fighters have left so far. And the political talks have bogged down on the whole question of names. Who will be the leaders of the new presidency council, new prime minister, and so forth. I think there are a lot of spoilers around. General Haftar, the militias in Tripoli, the so-called status quo party, those who don't want to see change because they are benefiting from the current stalemate. So I think it needs all the countries who are involved to withdraw, to implement the ceasefire. I think a good step would be with the withdrawal of the Syrian mercenaries who were taken to Libya by Turkey. Turkey itself needs to participate in the implementation of the ceasefire, and all the international community need to give their full backing to the United Nations. We used to say there is only one game in town, and I think avoiding uncoordinated initiatives, which we have seen in the past, and giving all the backing to the United Nations is important for all members of the international community. What I would like to see coming out of the political dialogue, not only a date for elections, which they've set for 24th of December next year, but a clear timeline of what needs to happen and a clear message from the UN Security Council that anyone who obstructs that timeline will be subject to international sanctions. Let me turn to Cyprus, a divided island since 1974. It's a bit of a forgotten conflict. Since 1974, there have been numerous efforts to try and resolve the conflict, back to Perez de Cuellar, the Annan Plan, looking at what was called a bizonal, bicommunal federation. That was the mantra we all had to learn when we went to Cyprus. Bizonal, bicommunal federation, in other words, two constituent states with one international personality, with one government overseeing the two, doing foreign affairs and defense and so forth, with a little bit of a shift on territory, some compensation on property issues, and a clear line on security, including a timed withdrawal of Turkish forces from the north of Cyprus. None of that has worked so far. The Annan Plan got very close in 2004, but it was rejected by the Greek Cypriots in a referendum, though it was supported by 65% of Turkish Cypriots in that referendum. It then went to Crans-Montana in 2017, another big effort with the Secretary General of the United Nations, Gutierrez. Many other senior leaders were there, but unfortunately that too failed. Why is it a forgotten conflict? I think it's a forgotten conflict for a range of reasons. I think part of the reason is the international community has tried time and again and failed, and quite frankly has got a little bit fed up with trying and failing. I think the international community has moved on to other things. There was a strong pressure in 2004 because Cyprus was joining the European Union, but Cyprus joined the European Union despite the fact that there was no solution. There was also a lot of pressure when the EU wanted Turkey to join the European Union, and clearly a solution to the Cyprus problem was a necessary precondition for that. I think even that prospect has faded in the last few years. I think it is also a forgotten conflict because nobody's being killed. It's not a crisis. The Greek Cypriots are comfortable within the European Union. They've had a lot of investment. If you live in Paphos or Limassol or Larnaca, you don't even see the fact that the island is divided. There is also the fact that the generations have moving on. Before 1974, many Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots lived alongside each other. The population swap in 1974-75 has meant that the communities are divided and they don't have much contact with each other. Also, the fact that on both communities, young men spend time in the military. They're taught that the other side is the enemy. The whole education system is not designed to build trust in the other side. So I think the prospects at the moment are pretty poor. I think the election of Ersin Tatar in the north makes it even more difficult because Ersin Tatar's approach is to have a two-state solution, which I don't think the European Union and the international community will ever accept. I think the opening of Varosha, the closed area of Varosha, which was also always a key bargaining chip in the negotiations, but opening it up has been a highly provocative act, which I think, again, means that building trust and believing in compromise is going to be more difficult. And clearly the exploration within Cyprus's exclusive economic zone in the Mediterranean by Turkish ships has also been highly provocative and means that building trust is going to be even more difficult. Now, the United Nations is still keen to try and regenerate a dialogue following the election of Ersin Tatar in the north. The Secretary General's Special Envoy, Jane Holl-Lute, has been on the island. I think she's still there at the moment. there's the idea of what they call a 5+1 meeting, which is the three guarantor powers, Turkey, Greece, United Kingdom, and the two leaders of the two communities getting together with the United Nations to see if there is the prospect of a new dialogue. I think that new dialogue needs to be based on where they stopped, where they finished in 2017 in Crans-Montana, and build on the large degree of agreement which was reached in Crans-Montana, build on that and see if a new compromise can be reached. But it is going to be a compromise, and I think all sides need to accept that. But I also think that process is a necessary, almost precondition, but it's a necessary step to resolve the high degree of tension within the Eastern Mediterranean. I think the fact of the energy resources in the Eastern Mediterranean gives an added incentive to trying to resolve the Cyprus problem. It's an opportunity which needs to be taken by the Cypriots, because they as two communities, they as Cypriots can benefit hugely from the settlement of their conflict and the unification of the island. So I hope that we will see the momentum starting behind that. But the only way forward, both in terms of the Cyprus problem and in terms of the division of the energy spoils in the Eastern Mediterranean, is through negotiation led by the United Nations, led by the European Union, to try and resolve these problems in the Eastern Mediterranean, to avoid the high risk of miscalculation. We've already seen evidence of that with Greek and Turkish ships bumping into each other. That sort of flashpoint, which we've seen in the past, needs to be avoided at all costs. That's my introduction. Thank you very much. Oh, in terms of Joe Biden, as far as Libya and the Eastern Mediterranean is concerned, I would say it's not going to be a top priority for him, but his commitment to multilateralism means that I think there will be more coherence coming out of Washington in terms of Libya, and more support for UN efforts. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your valuable insight, Ambassador Millett. Now, December 10th, a very important summit in the EU, and a summit that Turkey will be watching very, very closely. And we happen to be blessed by having the head of the EU delegation to Turkey, Nikolaus Meyer-Landrut. And I would like to give the floor to him. And Ambassador, please, we would like to listen to your insight on some EU-Turkey relations, EU's stance regarding the Eastern Mediterranean, its view of the Libyan conflict. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me on this panel. The range of issues is so large that 5 minutes is not a lot. So I will try to be brief. I think in terms of description of the situation, what the previous speaker has said covers very much how we see the situation, so I don't have to repeat that. What I would like to say is that the European Union very much has been calling for de-escalation in the Eastern Mediterranean, to create an environment which is conducive to diplomatic solutions, which is conducive to diplomacy, which is conducive to finding solutions together. This is still our main priority. And the European Union on the 1st of October has indicated that if there is de-escalation, if there is absence of individual unilateral actions which are disruptive or which are creating tensions, the European Union would also be willing to consider how to improve in what we call a positive agenda, the relationship between EU and Turkey. To reach that stage, I would try to say that it is important to get started the bilateral discussions between Greece and Turkey on their delimitation issues. This is very important. This is a forum where this has to take place. It is important also that the UN process, as it was just described, on Cyprus can resume and be a forum in which solutions are looked for. and the European Union will not be the main actor, but the European Union will be willing to support solutions as much as they emerge. And the European Union and also the Turkish president have both been calling for a multilateral conference with all Eastern Mediterranean countries to deal with those issues which have a multilateral dimension. So as much as we are able to put in place these different fora, as much as we are able to refrain from unilateral actions, we can create an environment in which then also EU-Turkey relations can be taken forward. So I hope that we will see the necessary actions and words, deeds from also from Turkey until the 10th of December, so that a positive dimension can be opened. But again, expectations have been voiced for now some time, and unfortunately also have been deceived at certain stages, with vessels going out again and coming back and going out again. So we need a more long-lasting window in which trust can be rebuilt. I think the word trust we heard before is really very important, and we need to build it again. On Libya, very quickly, I think we support every effort for a political solution and ceasefires, and the implementation of what already had been discussed in Berlin at the beginning of the year, which means withdrawal of foreign mercenaries and troops from Libya, so that the Libyans can find their solutions among themselves. For the Biden administration, I think it's still a bit early. We don't even have, they're not really in place. They're still in the setting up of their teams, but more support, more consistent support, multilateral and UN efforts is exactly, I think, also what we are expecting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Landrut. Thank you very much for your valuable insight as well. Now, we've seen the Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, say that Turkey's future is Europe. And most recently, the completion of the Order Trace's seismic activities, it looks like Turkey's in the middle of some type of rethink, maybe a re-engagement with the European Union. And who better to talk about this than one of the pioneers of Turkey's accession process to the EU, the former Minister of EU Affairs, Egemen Bağış. Mr. Bağış, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for having me. Greetings to all of the participants from the heart of Europe, Prague, where I'm very honored to represent my nation. First of all, I want to thank all the other panelists for their contributions. As Deputy Prime Minister Abushagur mentioned, Turkey is in Libya upon the invitation of the legitimate government of the Libyan people, the government that is recognized by the United Nations. And we are there as long as our invitation is valid, in response to help our Libyan allies, brothers and sisters. But it's also very intriguing that a permanent member of the UN Security Council is supporting the unrecognized, illegitimate, illegal entity which claims to represent the Libyan people. So that's a big dilemma to begin with in Libya. When it comes to the Cyprus issue, as Ambassador Millett explained very well, Turkey and Turkish Cypriots have always been very compromising, have always been very cooperative in order to find a solution. And the best example of that was the Annan plan. And I happen to be a member of the Turkish delegation in Burgenstock, where the Annan plan was prepared and finalized. And I remember then Prime Minister Erdogan asking then Commissioner Verheugen, what if the Greek Cypriots refuse and Turkish Cypriots accept this plan? And I remember him saying, that's impossible. The Greek Cypriots will accept it. The only problem is, can you get the Turkish Cypriots to accept this plan? But then Prime Minister, now President Erdogan's vision was very correct. And we saw that the majority of the Turkish Cypriots voted in favor of a solution. which would have been a major obstacle removed in Turkey's accession to EU. Well, we are now encountering new problems in addition to the old problems in Turkish-EU relations. I've always argued that Turkey's determination to become a member of EU should have its own rightful place in the Guinness Book of Records, because no country has waited this long to join any other international organization with this much commitment, this much determination. We are, for God's sake, trying to become a member of an organization since 1958, when was our first approach. And between then and now, there's been so many mistakes made on both sides, and I'm not blaming the EU. We had military coups, we had time periods when the relation was cut off, but we cannot change the past, but we can change the future. Now, we see that some countries are abusing Turkey's determination, and they're trying to use the EU to gain bilateral advantages. And the problems we encounter currently is mostly due to the abuse of membership solidarity and the veto right of some of the member countries for their foreign policy aspirations, and creating a pressure against the candidate country, Turkey. We have witnessed this in the Roseline incident very recently, where the Greek commander of a boat, of a security boat of Frontex, decided to board a Turkish-flagged vessel, despite objections from Turkey, I have to add, immediately ahead of the EU summit. Blind membership solidarity has been put above international law and the greater interests of EU. This is harming EU's reputation as well as its capacity to act as a global player. Turkey and EU can act successfully to contribute to the security, stability, and prosperity of the region, and but we are trying to take positive steps, but it takes two to tango. Turkey is ready to meet the Greek counterparts. We are ready to re-engage, to de-escalate, and Turkey aspires to maintain its relations with the EU with a constructive spirit, with an accession perspective. The Turkish ship Oruç has completed its planned seismic survey activity and has returned back to port. This is a window of opportunity that should not be missed. We're ready for exploratory talks the moment Greek side is ready. Our foreign ministers met in Slovakia, but we were expecting to announce the start of exploratory talks. Unfortunately, another announcement came between Greece and Egypt, which was very damaging to what Turkey was trying to achieve. So now the ball is at the Greek side. Our EU friends should encourage Greece to accept Turkey's proposal for talks and to take a constructive step for dialogue. Bilateral problems should not be an issue of EU, but should be resolved through bilateral talks. EU can facilitate dialogue and engage to this act to become a fair and objective broker, but this has not been the case till now. I know Chancellor Merkel really tried during the German presidency, but as I said, both sides have to be willing. The problem that we had seen in Cyprus is now becoming another issue between Turkey and Greece. The reason Annan Plan was refused by the Greek Cypriots is because they had nothing more to gain. They had already ensured membership to EU. Poor Turkish Cypriots had nothing more to lose because they had already lost their recognition capability. And now Greece is saying we're already a full member of EU. Why should we give in? But Turkey is the 16th largest economy in the world, the second largest military force within NATO, and a very important player for EU. I always argued that EU is one of the grandest peace projects of the history of mankind, but it is still a continental project. The day Turkey joins EU, it will become a global project, because Turkey's reach to different geographies will make EU a major global player, and deal with all the challenges ahead of us. So demonizing Turkey will not solve EU's problems related to Libya, Syria, Cyprus, migration, energy question, or other issues that are now taking our mutual interest hostage. EU has the tools and capacity to break this vicious cycle and create a conducive environment for dialogue and to create positive agenda. That's what this relationship needs, and I'm really hoping that the upcoming summit will become a game changer and will create an environment where EU leaders will have eye-to-eye chats with their Turkish counterparts, where Turkey can feel that we are still a potential member of the European family. Pushing Turkey aside or creating a negative momentum for the EU is not going to help anyone, neither in Europe nor in Turkey, but in other parts of the world, to which we should all be very careful. So we have to keep this accession perspective open for Turkey. And we have issues regarding the customs union. We have issues regarding free movement of Turkish citizens in Europe. We have issues about migration. We have issues about refugees. We have issues about energy, safety. All those can be resolved only through dialogue and cooperation. Turkey is ready. I hope Europe is ready as well.
Thank you, Ambassador Bağış. Also, I asked the question, what type of impact do you expect the new incoming Biden administration to have on Turkey-EU relations, Eastern Mediterranean? Can I get a quick minute and a half answer? Then I would also like to pose this question to Mr. Abushagur, and then I'm going to open the floor to our discussants as well.
Well, President-elect Biden is not a newcomer to politics. He has served in different parts of the U.S. government for many years, and he knows Turkey's capabilities. He knows Turkey's contributions, both in the past and potential cooperation in the future. Yes, he has uttered some unnecessary words during his campaign vis-a-vis Turkey, but he's not the first. Every U.S. president has said negative things about Turkey when they were candidates. But once they are elected into office, they realize their responsibility and Turkey's vulnerability and the vulnerability of having Turkey on their side, and have changed their views. So will President Biden. We have a saying in Turkish, the head that wears the crown gets wiser. I'm sure Mr. Biden will also be very cooperative and understand Turkey's potential. He will follow probably President Clinton's approach, and Clinton had said in the Turkish parliament that the next century will be shaped by Turkey's choices. One of the two people who wrote that speech for then President Clinton is now going to be the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who understands Turkey's role. And the Democrats have been very much in favor of Turkey's accession to EU. We're hoping that they can support Turkey's accession to this peace project.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Bağış. Also, Mr. Abushagur, the same question to you. What type of Biden impact are you expecting in Libya when we look at American activity around 2011 till the election of Trump? America was a little more active in Libya compared to the Trump era, where it has been very, very silent on Libya. So are you expecting any type of Biden impact?
Yes, as you mentioned, clearly during the U.S. has played a major role during the revolution, the 17th February Revolution, and also continued to play a major role by having a special envoy to Libya throughout the Obama administration. But of course, when Mr. Trump came to the presidency, Libya disappeared completely from the American agenda. and also because of the relationship between Mr. Trump and Putin, really opened a lot of room for the Russians to be able to get heavily involved in Libya through their mercenaries, their Wagner, and their support to Khalifa Haftar throughout the last 4 or 5 years. And of course, that gave Russia a place in the Mediterranean, where right now, I mean, their forces are entrenched in Jufra and also in some oil fields in the south of Libya, which is a very dangerous position for those to be. So we are hoping now, as Biden coming back, and of course he was the vice president during the Obama time, and we're hoping that Libya will have a better place in his agenda. Of course, it's not going to be a priority because he is facing with huge issues, both economic and because of the pandemic and so on, and also the situation in the country itself. But I think the Democrats, they still have an interest in Libya in general, and I'm hoping that the Biden administration will be able to become a little bit more involved in the Libyan situation. I would say positively, not the way that other countries has played over the last number of years. And of course, I understand that their position. I'm sure they don't want to see a much more stronger presence for Russia to be in Libya. And especially with the administration of Biden as expected, it's not going to be a friendly relationship between Russia and the US. And so clearly, we look forward to the Biden administration, and we hope that they will be engaged in Libya to help the people in Libya be able to get peace in their country and be able to get all those spoilers who they are in the country, who they have played a very negative role in Libya over the years, to be out from there. So we are very hopeful.
Thank you, Mr. Abushagur.
A much better position there. Yes.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Abushagur. Now, I want to open the floor up to our very, very valuable and distinguished discussants as well. Since we're all gentlemen, let's start with ladies first. Valeria Talbot, Senior Research Fellow and Co-Head of Middle East and North Africa Center at ISPI. Questions, insights, views, please. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me to this very distinguished panel, and thanks to all the speakers for their insightful contributions. I would like to ask a question to Mr. Abushagur. Yesterday, at the Rome Med Dialogue, Stephanie Williams, acting special representative of the UN Secretary General for Libya, said that foreign interferences have negatively impacted the multilateral approach to resolving the Libyan crisis under the auspices of the UN mediation. However, she added, last January, the Berlin process was designed to bring together regional and international actors that had most influence on the ground in order to have a productive environment in Libya, and some progress has been made, above all in the last month, on the free tracks. So a ceasefire was agreed in October, and a political process has started. A process that is supposed, as you said, to lead to general election in December next year. You said there are a lot of serious challenges, and I would like to ask you, in your opinion, what are main challenges and main obstacles today to this process, and how do you see today foreign interference in this process? This is the first question. And then, if I may, a second question to you and to Mr. Bağış. What are the main pillars of cooperation between Turkey and GNA? Turkey has been the main ally of GNA in the last year. and what is the importance of energy in this bilateral cooperation? Thank you very much.
Mr. Abushagur, question to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, clearly, as Stephanie, Miss Stephanie Williams has mentioned, and as I mentioned before, really the intervention by countries near and far from Libya, they have played a very, very negative role, and they continue to play that. And of course, if you look at over the last number of years, before even the Berlin meeting, which of course has been attended by the GNA. Of course, I am not a representative of GNA. I'm just so the represented by GNA, but Mr. Haftar, who was supported by both Moscow and France and UAE at the time, he withdrew from the meeting and refused to accept to sign a ceasefire. And those countries, they are the one who advise him not to do that. And they continue to advise him to wage his war and try to bring back a military rule and administration in Libya, which is clearly the Libyan people will not accept to get back into a military rule. They have lived under Gaddafi for 42 years, and they understand what that means. And so this is a very serious issue and a very serious problem for Libya. And of course, the forces which being brought and mercy brought by these countries, they are still in Libya. And also there is still a flow of weapons into Libya, even though there is an embargo by the United Nations against weapons to be brought to Libya. That is still going on. That means there is still the intention of not allowing this issue to be over and become more of a political solution than this military solution which they are proposing and they are pushing forward at their agenda. So that's the first thing. The second part of your question, which has to do with Turkey relationship with the GNA. Clearly, GNA, it is the government which is being accepted, and it is the legitimate government in Libya. And of course, unfortunately, we have another government which has no legitimacy neither in Libya nor outside of Libya. And that is being used continuously to spoil the situation in the country there. And so the relationship between Turkey and Libya clearly came through the GNA, the Government of National Accord, through the treatment, the agreement with that, and also the help that came to Libya to support Tripoli under what was under invasion, under attack and assault by Khalifa Haftar and the Russians and the French and others, helped to end that bloody massacre of the country, of the city itself, the country overall. And of course, when it comes to energy, clearly this is a very important. Libya is a major exporter of energy, both in the Mediterranean. And also, if we look at this side of things now, the production of oil in Libya is in chaos. One time it is on, one time it is off, because it's not under one government, which is the GNA. It is there is a lot of hands are playing in that, and also a lot of the oil from Libya being sold in the black market by these countries themselves, so they are benefiting from it. And of course, all of that has to end by the spoilers to be out from the Libyan scene, and let Libyans decide to do that. Now, regarding the dialogue that is going on, clearly the United Nations and UNSMIL, I know the effort they have in trying to do. It is a very important, but also at the same time, when I look at the members of those who they are in dialogue, a lot of them, they have no legitimacy. They don't have much of any public support from the Libyan people, who they have been now sitting and trying to decide on the future of Libya. And that's clearly, and also at the same time, I mean, the United Nations trying to make those people the de facto legislative body in the next year for that. So that's also quite not exactly the right approach to this problem. Of course, we need a dialogue, but there's other ways of bringing far more legitimate parties to be able to be part of that. I mean, in Libya, even under all this chaos that's going on, there are local elections for municipalities, and it could have been a way to be able to get the representatives from these 13 districts to be elected locally and be able part of that. Then they can have some sort of legitimacy in the discussions that is being going on in there.
I think I was also asked to respond to the second part of the question. Yusuf? You guys hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay,
Cannot hear Yusuf.
Valerie was asking my views about the main pillar of the relationship between Turkey and the legitimate government of Libya. The main pillar is our common heritage. Libyan people have been by the Turkish side during both our War of Independence, and we were having difficulties in Cyprus in 1974. The Turkish people will never forget the support that we have received from Libya. And at a time when they need help for their safety and stability, Turkey could not look the other way. And we are, as I said, we're there upon their invitation, and we will stay as long as they would like us to stay. The legitimate representatives of the Libyan people have asked us, is energy playing a role? Well, as Deputy Prime Minister Abushagur said, energy is an important advantage for Libya. I remember their daily oil sales could reach as much as 500 million euros per day when they had stability. Unfortunately, now it's not in those amounts, and the main victim of this difference is the Libyan people, who have lost their revenues and resources. But never in our history did any Libyan leader build a tent in the garden of my president's palace. So our relationship is not based on daily interactions, and they've never financed any of our politicians' political campaigns as it is the case in some other European countries. But Turkish-Libyan relationship is a very old historical relationship based on common heritage and solidarity.
Thank you, Ambassador Bağış. I was having some technical difficulties there. Sorry about that. I want to give a little more time to our discussants because we're running out of time. We only have 90 minutes. We could probably talk for 90 hours on this topic because it's very, very important. Next, I want to go to Gürkan Kumbaroğlu. I believe he has some comments and questions as well. Mr. Kumbaroğlu is a professor at Boğaziçi University and president of the Turkish Association of Energy Economics. Mr. Kumbaroğlu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Erim. First of all, I would like to expand on one statement that Mr. Bağış made, which I think is very important. He said blind membership solidarity for the EU. And I think that's at the heart of any possible solution in Cyprus. So I want to expand on that and ask Mr. Landrut, who made a very nice speech calling for de-escalation, etc. But when we look at the reality, fact is that the European Union recently extended the sanctions framework against Turkey on gas drilling in disputed waters while in the Eastern Mediterranean, while it does not have any such thing against blocks, disputed waters announced by the Greek Cypriots, which means that essentially the European Union backs up the Greek Cypriot claims, patting the back. So this is part of the blind membership solidarity as the way I see it. Going back historically, looking at how this all started, 2007, is the year when the Greek Cypriots drove the offshore blocks, and 2011 is when the gas drilling started. September 19, 2011, and then in response to that, the Turkish Cypriot side, Turkey and Turkish Republic Northern Cyprus made this maritime delimitation agreement. And then 2 days later, the Turkish Republic Northern Cyprus blocks were announced. Now, of course, it can be that the EU says we back up the Cypriots because we believe their claims are true. But look at these claims. I mean, I just want to give just at the tip of the iceberg one little example of a claim of trying to enforce economic exclusive zone around the islands. Take the example of the island Meis, or so-called Kızılhisar, or so-called Castellorici, which is 2 kilometers from the Turkish mainland and 580 kilometers from the Greek mainland. This island has a surface area of about 10 kilometers squares, and the claim of maritime jurisdiction area by the Greek side is 41,000 kilometers square. Which essentially is part of the attempt on the Greek side, Cypriot side, to get Turkey stuck into a very little area in the Eastern Mediterranean, essentially accounting to 41,000 kilometers squares. While a fair and equitable solution that Turkey puts on goes to 189 kilometers squared, not to mention that Turkey is the longest, is the country with the longest coastline along the Eastern Mediterranean. So this is number one. So my question to Landrut, if he sees any blind membership solidarity here, I just gave a very small example. Then on the role of energy and Libya, now there was this question by Valerie of Turkey, of the role of energy in bilateral cooperation, Turkey, Libya. I think Mr. Bağış gave the answer with the whole common heritage. But I would like to ask Mr. Abushagur on the role of European countries, on the role of energy in the cooperation with Libya, with the non-legitimate government in particular, because we see countries like France, they're very active. Now we know that Total, the French oil giant, has been active in Libya for decades. And has a right in key fields. We know that Italian oil giant Eni also is the largest producer in the country, for example. So there are European interests there, and how do these energy interests play a role in the Libyan conflict? Thank you.
Okay. Very, very nice insight and questions by Mr. Kumbarola. Ambassador Landrut, first question was to you.
Yes, thank you very much. This gives me an opportunity to react to this. Honestly, I don't see the EU hostage of individual member states. And there's also an important point, which is perhaps not always perceived from the outside. There is serious and very high-level internal EU diplomacy also going on. This should not be minimized. If you minimize the efforts of those who try to balance the approach within the Union, they might lose interest in balancing this because they don't get any credit for the effort. And I'm talking about individual leaders, also leaders of individual member states. So the European Union, to a certain extent, cannot be what you ask from them to be an impartial broker, because the European Union has its membership. And members who are in the European Union will, of course, deserve the solidarity which is necessary. But we have never, and that's why we are looking for the different fora I described. The European Union has never subscribed to any map. The European Union has always called for bilateral discussions and solution on maritime border issues or continental shelf or exclusive economic zones. We have always said for the Cyprus issue, we support the UN approach. We have said that for deconflicting, we want NATO to play its role, and that we are trying actively to promote the idea of a multilateral conference for the region. So the idea of the European Union is not that itself can be the broker because of its membership structure, but that it can support the different fora and help to set up the different fora, the relevant fora in which issues can be discussed. This requires an overall atmosphere of trust and an abstention from unilateral actions which are perceived, and perhaps perceptions are different between Turkey and others. This is completely shared. So this is
we can't hear the speaker.
Important. That is this now working?
I can hear.
Can
no,
everyone
what
hear?
I wanted to say,
Ambassador Lambert?
Yeah.
I can hear.
Yeah, the important thing I wanted to make, the point I wanted to make is, don't ask from the European Union to be something which the European Union cannot be because of its membership structure. But what the European Union can do and is doing, and what many people in the European Union are arguing for, is to help to establish the right fora in which the competent parties can deal with the different issues under the UN auspices for Cyprus, in the bilateral discussions between Greece and Turkey for the sea border, continental shelf, economic zone delimitations. And again, the European Union has never, as an institution, subscribed to any map. It's just not true. We have not. We have given solidarity, but we have not. We have always asked for bilateral solutions on these issues. So I hope we can all together come to the conclusion that the most important thing is to work in the different fora for solutions, which then also creates space for EU-Turkey relations to improve. And I just in passing, allow me to say that on the boarding of the Turkish vessel, of course, our understanding is that international law and established practice were respected. I just say this for the record. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Abushagur, the second part of the question was to you. And if we can keep our answers short, because we have a lot of distinguished discussants I want to hear from as well. And after this, I want to record the questions. I want each of the discussants to give some insight, and we'll ask the questions at the end after everyone's had their say on the topic. So, Mr. Abushagur,
yeah, sure.
The floor is yours again.
Regarding regarding Europe and its relationship with Libya, and of course, if you look at Europe, the only thing they are interested in Libya are two issues. In particular, it is the oil and migration. And of course, the European Union does not operate as unisons because its members, they have a conflicting interest in Libya, especially when it took France and Italy in particular. And this, because of this conflict that they have in their interest in Libya, they played a very different and really very damaging roles in the last few years. And you can remember that Mr. Macron, he invited Haftar and others to be in France more than once. And then the Italian also, they did the same thing in Palermo. But all of those, really, they did not constructively engage the Libyans into this, because all what they're interested in, be able to flow energy towards them and the stop of the migration from Libya. While, of course, the Libyans themselves are the ones who they are suffering because of these issues. I mean, right now, the common Libyan person cannot even get their salaries from the banks because of the problem of liquidity. And also the income of the country. And I know in 2012, when we are in the government, the production was 1.5 million barrels a day. Now it's only a few 100,000, and sometimes there is none. So really, the European, especially France and Italy, through their Total and Eni in particular, clearly that's all what they are interested in. And also they are not really engaged in a very positive way to help the Libyan people to overcome their current situation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Abushagur. Now I want to call on Hakan Berument, Director of Energy Research at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies and Professor of Economics at Bilkent University. Mr. Berument, some insight on what you've heard today so far, and if you have any questions, I'm going to take note of them and ask them at the end.
I'm going to ask a question, Mr. Miller, if it is possible. The question is this: there is so much untapped natural resources in Eastern Mediterranean, and the Cyprus as an island sit at the middle of it. And it seems that without solving an island problem or the Cyprus problem, the natural resources from the Eastern Mediterranean either to Europe or more economically feasible option is to come to Turkey is not going to be possible. And if it is possible, I'd like to hear the option about that. And also, if the island is split between the two internationally recognized governments, is it possible that it is going to open the options that these natural resources will come to Europe through Turkey or through the EastMed pipeline? And if it is not possible, do you think that Europe has something to do, because the Turkish side is on the positive side and the constructive side, to solve the problem, and there will be a kind of quote-unquote the political intermediation that it is going to ease the problem so that these natural resources, to be particularly the natural gas, will be able to come to Europe? Thank you.
Ambassador Millett, that was a really good question, actually. I kind of want you to answer that if you can very quickly so we can move on. I know I said I was going to leave questions for the end, but I would like to hear your thoughts on this quickly.
Yeah, and it's quite a difficult question to answer, because it gets involved in all of these legal issues to do with the law of the sea, which is the law that the Cyprus and the European Union countries recognize, but which Turkey doesn't. And therefore, the whole issue of exclusive economic zones and the continental shelf, and the previous speaker made the point about Castellorizo, tiny little island which claims a large amount of exclusive economic zone. I think, in answer to Professor Berument's question, I highly doubt that you're going to get to a stage of having two internationally recognized governments on the island of Cyprus. I think it has to be something along the lines of a federation, two constituent states, devolved responsibility as much as possible, but with one international personality. And then the Cypriots can share the welfare, the benefits, the prosperity that comes from the energy resources. And certainly Europe would be a major market for the gas that would be produced. And a pipeline which goes either via Turkey or across the sea is going to be a huge investment. But it's clearly Europe would be a major market. And all the countries, Turkey, Cyprus, Turkish Cypriots, Greek Cypriots, can all benefit from that. But as previous speakers have said, it requires a negotiation to reach that agreement.
Great. Thank you very much, Ambassador Millett. Now, let's move over to Komşu, our neighbor, Mr. George Zagopoulos, I believe, if I'm not butchering your last name too much, sir. Sorry about that. Can we get some insight from you? I'd like to see how your viewpoints on the Eastern Mediterranean.
Thank you very much for having me on board. It's great to be part of this panel of excellent and distinguished speakers. Just a very quick comment on the Castellorizo island. From a Greek perspective, this island, this tiny island indeed, should not be treated as a single island, but as part of the Dodecanese. It's a group of islands, and all the previous conventions in that regard included Castellorizo in the Dodecanese chain. So this needs to be also taken into account. But I would like also to take this opportunity and ask a question at the beginning for Ambassador Bağış. He mentioned before that Oruç Reis completed the research activities a few days ago. But if we journey back to mid-September, we will see that the situation was more or less the same. The Oruç Reis returned to the Antalya port. the EU Council was pending, then the EU Council took place, and again, Orange Race went back to undelimited Eastern Mediterranean waters. And my question is how trust can be restored in that regard between the European Union and Turkey. And my second question to Ambassador Landrut, but I believe that all panelists will have to offer valuable insights, is related to the idea of the multilateral conference, which was proposed in the recent Special Council of the 1st and 2nd October. If there is any agenda on this, and how do you see the role of the East Med Gas Forum in relation to a potential multilateral conference, which is a regional organization recently formed by Greece, Israel, Cyprus, Jordan, Egypt, and the Palestinian Authority? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I took note of both of your questions. Before we get to the question part, though, I want to give other discussants also some time. So let's go to my favorite Libya analyst. I follow him very closely on Twitter, Emad Badi. Emad, do you have anything to add to the insights that we've heard from our valuable panelists and distinguished discussants?
I mean, I don't have any insights. I actually have a few questions, perhaps one to Mr. Nikolaus with regards to the kind of Libyan political dialogue, so to speak, at the moment. In 2015, the European Union, in addition to the US, was somewhat instrumental to brokering the Libyan political agreement. The impetus kind of to support that the LPA at the time were perhaps reasons that were a little bit external to Libya, and that there was a so-called migration crisis, and the increasingly apparent or threatening ISIS footprint in Sirte. Now we don't particularly have those reasons anymore. So I don't think is the same urgency kind of, or do you see the same level of support of the political dialogue at the moment at the EU level? And second of all, that agreement, despite EU support, ended up collapsing partly because of the unilateral support of even certain European states of Khalifa Haftar. So have there been any lessons learned since then, and how are you incorporating those into this period, so to speak?
Ambassador Landrut, did you note that question? We're gonna get back to it. Sami Hamdi, insights. I know you're always ready with a very good, very valuable comment. Follow Sami on TV all the time. Another person that I follow very closely on social media as well. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the speakers, and it's great to see people that I follow on Twitter and see on TV all in one forum. I think that while I appreciate a lot of the diplomatic language that's been said in this particular forum, I think it's always important to highlight that there has never been a country in which NATO or the United Nations have brokered a political agreement and that country has subsequently seen prosperity. Whether that's Iraq, where the UN and NATO preferred a power sharing arrangement between the Sunni, Shi'i, and the Kurds, and that cemented a proxy system. Whether that's in Bosnia, where again, in order to appease Russia, we had the Dayton Agreement, a division of power between the Serbs, the Bosniaks, and the Croats in South Sudan, which the international community was a heavy supporter of, but in the end relented and came up with a power sharing agreement between the Denka and the Nue, and now we have, excuse me, a proxy system whereby you have Kampala and Khartoum, and an inability to come to some sort of arrangement that empowers the people and ensures that the structure of the state relies on a popular mandate as opposed to the mandate of, as we see in Libya, of Cairo, of Ankara, of Paris, of Washington, of Moscow, and of all of these other players. And we're seeing it today in the political process. We're seeing Bashagha, Maitik, Haftar, Aguila Saleh, not necessarily addressing the Libyan people because they are fully aware that the mandate to rule is going to come from outside powers. And what we're seeing, and the common denominator in all of these situations, is the absence of a national reconciliation, the monopolization of victimhood by the Shia in Iraq, the monopolization of victimhood by the Kurds in Iraq, the monopolization of victimhood by the GNA in Libya, the monopolization of victimhood by the LNA in Libya, and the absence of a genuine national reconciliation that acknowledges that while there was a revolution in Libya that overthrew Gaddafi, there were also revenge attacks, there were also the blockade, there were also indiscriminate killing of Libyans suspected of being pro-Gaddafi. That inherently has an impact on the narrative and on the perspectives of Libyans towards what a future Libya should look like. And what I am terrified of the most now is that this political process, which has been brought about by a US desire to contain Russia, as opposed to a genuine need to empower the Libyans, a political process that's been brought about by a desire to establish security and stability, even if that comes at the expense of a democratic transition, and that was reflected in the international apathy to Haftar's offensive on Tripoli. What I fear is that we're cementing a proxy system, and what I found really interesting in this forum, without going on for too long, what I found really interesting in this forum is the emphasis on energy from our Turkish speakers and the insistence on the narrative of the GNA when you have regional neutral countries like Algeria and Tunisia questioning the legitimacy of a GNA that even its own militias do not appreciate or necessarily recognize, only insofar as it benefits their own interest. And this is why I think there is no solution to Libya, even if we have elections, unless there is a national reconciliation. My question is this to His Excellency Mustafa Abushagur and to His Excellency Peter Millett. To what extent is security and stability the priority over the establishing a system in which the mandate is for the Libyan people, because they are not mutually exclusive, they are not necessarily linked to one another? And in what way can the political process promote an empowering of the Libyan factions and push the political factions to address the Libyans and amass local support as opposed to international support? And one very controversial note, and it pains me to say it personally, is that Haftar, for all of his antics, and despite the fact that I believe he's a disastrous influence on Libya, is the only Libyan actor who managed to unite enough tribes in order to launch an offensive or turn the military dynamics in his favor. And but for Turkey, he would have taken Tripoli. Turkey is the reason we have dialogue today. The second question, very quickly, on the Eastern Mediterranean, is that while we're talking about the nitty-gritty details of the law of the sea, as His Excellency Peter Millett spoke about, I think that it's also important to highlight that the reason there is such tension and aggression on the part of Turkey, on the part of Greece, on the part of the EU, on the part of France, is quite simply that they don't listen to each other. When President Erdogan was calling for support in Syria and pleading with them, and I use the word pleading, for support in northern Syria, support with the refugees, the EU said it's your business. We have a far-right problem and we have a migration crisis that we need to deal with for ourselves. And at the same time, you had France, which is trying to push for increased pressure on Turkey with little, and I know His Excellency Mr. Landrut spoke about acknowledging the efforts of European partners to lobby for peace, but noting that France is taking the lead in European foreign policy and putting pressure on Turkey. My question on the East Med is this: to what extent is Europe prepared to listen to Turkey, and what is Europe's vision for a relationship with Turkey? Is it, as France suggests, that Turkey is the security guard of the southeastern border and should fulfill its responsibilities without expecting to be an equal partner? Or is it genuinely one of cooperation, of sharing resources in the Eastern Mediterranean? Because this has a direct impact on the security and stability of our people in the region. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Sami. I'm going to give all our panelists about 3 minutes at the end to answer the questions that were given to them, but I want to give our discussants, we have 3 more discussants, I want to give them a chance. Mustafa Bashkara, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me in this very valuable discussion. Actually, I was going to make an international law perspective on the maritime denomination, but for now, the time limit is very limited. So I will just reply to our komşu, Mr. George's view on Mays Island. I must add to his view that on the Mays Island, to say that it's a part of a group of islands is totally baseless from the point of international law, because it cannot be accepted as a group of islands, because Greece does not meet necessary conditions to be accepted as an archaeological state. It's one and only island in that region. So I need to absolutely just raise this issue. It's unlawful and illogical to accept a 2,000 square island to give 40,000 square measure maritime areas. It is against the main rule of international law on maritime delimitation, which are equity and proportionality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bashkara. Neil Killiam, Director at Azure Strategy and Associate Fellow at the Middle East and North Africa Program, Chatham House. Floor is yours for valuable insights and any questions you want to direct towards the panelists.
Thank you very much. I've just got one sort of short question. We've heard a lot about sort of isolated actions or isolated interventions. And we've passed through a period, probably for the past 8, maybe 12 years, where unilateral action has been encouraged. Who or what institution or what organization can now dissuade those unilateral actors from acting in such a way? You know, we hear about the merits of multilateral action, and I think that's right. I mean, is it the Biden administration? Is that where we're placing some faith in bringing everyone around to multilateral talks? And I'm also including the Gulf Arab states here, in particular the UAE, which we haven't really discussed. So it goes broader than the Mediterranean. Or is it the UN? Peter Millett sort of said towards the end of his comments that the UN or UN Security Council could be responsible for keeping all states to a timeline and ensuring and maybe threatening sanctions if there are sort of actions that undermine that. So my question is, if we move to this, if we want to discourage unilateral action, is it the UN that does that, or are we placing an inordinate amount of faith in the Biden administration to play that role? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question. I'm going to get to the panelists in a minute. Tarık Meyerisi, floor is yours for insight and questions.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. I'll try to be concise here and actually just try to bring everything together because there is an underlying current that ties these two topics together, and I think we've been slightly distracted. We're not seeing the wood for the trees, so to speak. The Eastern Mediterranean crisis is not going to be decided by taking out a tape measure and seeing who's closer to Castellarizo. And the Libyan crisis is not going to be resolved by debating or arguing over which of Libya's failed governments has legitimacy and which doesn't. At its core, this whole thing is driven by a breakdown in the European-Turkish relationship. And I think this is the most distilled form of strategic confusion that we can see following the death of the dream of Turkish accession to the EU, which, although not everybody will admit, we all know subconsciously at this stage it's just not going to happen. And the result of this is that Turkey is more self-sufficient, is more forcefully pursuing its national interests on its own borders and its neighboring sea and elsewhere. And Europe has kind of just been shocked because, as a collective entity, Europe is largely insular, and it's not really sure how to respond. And so its response is being driven by those most outraged because Turkey's newly forceful foreign policy is ruining their own attempts at forceful foreign policy. And this is to do with EU member states, whether it's France's policy of supporting Haftar's putsch in Libya, or Greece trying to build a new security alliance centered around it in the Eastern Mediterranean. And this friction will only really be smoothed when the divergence can be reconciled and a new vision for a strategic relationship between the two can be agreed upon. And this should be centered around trade, firstly, yes, but also it should be centered around othering Russia, which is the other kind of mischief maker. And right now, this just isn't happening. Instead, there are points of argument and confusion and debating on maritime boundaries and who is right and wrong in Libya. And so what's actually happening is that Russia is working to other Europe in Turkey's eyes. And I think this is very dangerous, and the track or the trajectory that we're going down will only lead to increased fractiousness. I just wanted to give a quick response to this Biden question as well, because I feel like everybody always wants U.S. intervention until they actually get U.S. intervention, and the transformation of Libya into a great power game with the U.S. and the Russians duking it out is just going to be devastating. The only way forward in the Libyan scene is to prize multilateralism and try to construct and enforce some rules to the game, which is what the Germans are very admirably trying to do. I'll stop with the controversial points there. Thank you, Yusuf.
Thanks, Tarek. And last but not least, Professor Erol Kaymak, floor is yours, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. Tarek's comments were very holistic. My comments will be much more domestic. Mr. Millett mentioned that Cyprus was a forgotten conflict, and that's very important because we forget that many shareholders and stakeholders are not really represented in many of these conflicts, and that's the way forward. I should point out that with respect to our relationship with the European Union, it's a one-way street. I'm a Turkish Cypriot. We have no representation in any of these institutions. We are literally internationally isolated. And as a consequence of that, a lot of these things that are happening around us, but not with our consent. So when we talk about trust, it's mutual trust. And in fact, I would argue that the fact that a hardliner was elected recently as a Turkish Cypriot leader reflects that growing mistrust. Mr. Bağış had mentioned a few moments ago that in 2004, the Turkish Cypriots had endorsed a reunification plan. Now the same United Nations comes back to us again, 15, 16, 17 years later, and argues that we must follow the same path to where? It's been argued that Cyprus is now a linchpin in solving this old dilemma or conundrum with respect to the extraction of natural resources in the Eastern Mediterranean. If that's the case, are there any prospects for the UN 5-party summit, 5+1 party summit to succeed? I have grave doubts about this, and it seems to me that our only hope, unfortunately, for multilateralism is that, yes, indeed, that the Biden presidency comes in and sort of helps us negotiate, because with respect to Cyprus, the state solution cannot be accepted by the European Union by virtue of the accession treaty of 2003. And on the other hand, the Turkish Cypriots at this point are not prepared to countenance a federal settlement, which the Greek Cypriots only nominally accept. So my general question would be then, are there any prospects whatsoever? And if not, can we then take this 5+1 summit that's being proposed and build on so that we can have broader participation of stakeholders and shareholders? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Professor Kaymak. Now we have exactly 12 minutes. That gives us 3 minutes per panelist. Ambassador Landrut, let's start with you. You had a lot of questions directed towards you. 3 minutes to answer as much as you can.
Well, thank you very much. I'll try my best. On the multilateral conference and the difference to the gas forum, I think there are two main differences. The first is that we want a conference with a participation of all concerned. And that means, of course, Turkey. That means that there is the question of participation is different. And the second difference is that we think that a wider range of issues should be addressed, not only the energy question, but also other interests or other questions of mutual interest. So wider participation and wider issues. The second point on Libya, 2015 today, I think what we have learned, we have tried to implement in the Berlin conference and in the run-up to the Berlin conference, where the fundamental principles were to reduce external influence as much as possible, if not at all, and to thus allow space for the different parties in Libya to achieve their solution and, of course, come then to national reconciliation and elections. I think that is an important part. Perhaps I leave it at these two questions because they were specific on the other more wider issues I had time to speak before. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador Landrut. Ambassador Millett, there was also many questions directed to you regarding Cyprus and Libya as well. Floor is yours.
Emad Badi asked about Skhirat and the EU approach there. I was happily part of the EU team in Skhirat. I'm afraid with Brexit that's no longer the case. And then, of course, France split away. There was the conflict between France and Italy over influence in Libya. I just say that there was an E4 statement, UK, Italy, Germany, France together. I think that indicates a bit of an effort to bring France back into the fold. It's not there yet, but I think that's helpful. Sami Hamdi asked about national reconciliation and so on. I think Libyan national reconciliation is absolutely crucial. There's a lot of movement now by young people in Libya to try and gather a voice, which I think has to be encouraged. But the point about security and the political process, they have to be linked. You can't have a political process without a proper ceasefire, and a ceasefire which has been implemented. The problem with Skhirat was that it was only political. There wasn't a security track. There wasn't an economic track. The solution has to be an integrated solution, which brings together a political process, a security process, security sector reform, DDR and so forth, and economic reform as well. Neil's point about who can tackle the problem of the violations of the arms embargo, the impunity, the fact that the panel of experts produces wonderful reports which are never really discussed. I think you have to have a willingness to name and shame. The UN has a role to play, but let's be frank, the UN is never going to sanction those sort of countries. The UAE and the Russians, of course, are not going to accept sanctions. I think behind the scenes pressure from the United States is something that we can hope for. It's not going to happen quickly, but I think more naming and shaming and more proper discussion of the panel of experts results will be valuable. And finally, the point from Professor Errol Kaymak about the prospects in Cyprus, I agree, they're not good. It's pretty bleak at the moment. But the only way the Turkish Cypriots are going to benefit is by participating again. They will be significant winners if a solution can be found. And I think the pressure on the energy sector in the Eastern Mediterranean creates an opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Millett. Ambassador Bağış, many questions also directed to you, and closing remarks for yourself as well.
Well, when Tarek said everybody is expecting or waiting for the U.S. intervention until U.S. intervenes, he just reminded me of a quote by Prime Minister Churchill, who said, Americans always do the right thing after exploiting all the other options. So we have to find solutions on our own. Our neighbor from Greece asked about Oruç Reis and why it went back to do its survey after being in port in September. I think I should respond back with a question and say, what happened after September? Did we reach a solution? Did the Greek Cypriots agree to share the resources around the island with their Turkish Cypriot neighbors? They are very well sharing the water of the island. They are very well sharing the electricity. They have very good cooperation in garbage collection, even on health, in some of the sectors. Why not on energy? We have to be very frank. 70% of the energy resources that Europe needs today are either to the south, east, or north of Turkey. And Europe, which happens to be on our west, needs Turkey's cooperation to have access to those energy resources, unless someone invents wireless technology of transferring energy resources. So at the time when Europe needs Turkey's cooperation in the field of energy, even the chapter on energy could not be opened because the Greek Cypriots have chosen to veto it. And the other 27 are just looking and ignoring this fact, whereas the Greek Cypriots are taking their energy interests hostage. So there is, unfortunately, a blind membership solidarity which is hurting the EU's interests. What Turkey wants is a fair solution. That's why we have proposed a regional conference on Eastern Mediterranean with a view of discussing possible ways forward. We actually shared a non-paper with the European Commission, and we're waiting for this proposal to be considered favorably. I don't agree with Ambassador Millett that a two-state solution is totally out of question. Maybe that could be a source of inspiration for Israelis and Palestinians as well. Maybe a two-state solution in Cyprus could also lead the way to solving another problem of humanity. But of course, a confederation where rights of each side are respected would be our preference. But the two-state solution would be an alternative if that solution is not feasible. What Turkey would like to do is work with our partners, with our allies, in terms of finding solutions. So in order not to lose its transformative power over Turkey completely, the EU should support Turkey's reform agenda, which is being renewed, especially in the areas of economy, justice, and democracy. Sanctions and further restrictive measures against Turkey will not solve any of our problems, but will be totally a lose-lose situation. So keeping the accession perspective open to Turkey and strengthening the relations based on a positive agenda will be the best strategic investment that EU can do. And I have to remind everyone that the days of dictating Turkey's foreign policy are behind us. Turkey is a fully functioning democracy where public opinion does matter, and Turkey takes into consideration the sensitivities of her people and the needs of the region when determining her foreign policy.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Bağış, for your valuable insight. And we're going to close out with final comments by Mustafa Abushagur. There were some very important Libya comments made by Sami Hamdi, an important question asked by Ahmad Timbadi, and many of the guests also touched on Libya as well. Closing comments to answer these questions that were directed towards you.
Yes. Clearly, the Libya conflict and Libya situation is very complex. The first thing I would like to address is legitimacy in Libya. I mean, which body is legitimate? Because if you look at this one here, if you take the parliament, if you take the General National Congress, which right now called the State Council, and the GNA, all of them, they had certain terms and they have expired. I mean, the parliament, by the law, it has given it 18 months. Right now, they take their legitimacy from the Skhirat agreement. That's the agreement that they have agreed, got from it. But also at the same time, they are the ones who they have worked hardly to obstruct the agreement from being implemented. So they use it in one way for legitimacy, but at the same time there. Now, the dialogues that are happening right now is because of this intervention, because people, they seek the power from the outside sources, which I agree with Sami very clearly on that. That's why they are running to all these capitals. They are running to Paris, they are running to Moscow, they are running to Egypt, to Cairo, to Istanbul, and so on, and trying to get some sort of legitimacy from the outside, not from the Libyan people themselves. If you look at the dialogue that's going on, either in Tunis right now, the interest of the Libyan people is not exactly on the table. The interest on the table is who gets what from this power that is going there. And that's why every time when they have, I understand the United Nations dialogues always end up in failing, because those people who they are sitting there in this dialogue, they would like to see what they're going to get, what are the position they will be given. And that's what the problem there. To me, the issue for Libya, it is a Libyan problem. And the only way it can be solved is by the Libyan people themselves. Libyans, they have to learn how to work together and to be able, they can meet everywhere but in Libya. I mean, just look at this. They can meet in Morocco, they can meet in Cairo, they can meet in Tunis, but they cannot meet in Libya. And that's really a very serious problem, because the Libyan problem is a Libyan problem. And all forces, regardless who it is, they need to be out of the country. That's the only way. So leave the Libyan people themselves. And when they realize that they have to solve their problem, Libyans at the end, they're going to come together and do their reconciliation and be able, because at the end, Libya is one, really it is a country, even though people, they try to segment it, to fragment it. Khalifa Haftar worked very hard to fragment the country. Some of the powers from the outside world, they try to fragment it and they work very hardly. They would like to see it. Some of them, they would like to make the country to be broken in pieces. So each one of those will be able to get it. So So the solution for Libya is within the Libyan hands, and also for all foreign powers to take their forces, their mercenaries, their weapons outside of Libya and let Libyan live and probably solve their problem themselves.
Mr. Abushagur, thank you for your comments. We have run out of time. Ambassador Bağış, Ambassador Millett, Ambassador Landrut, Mr. Mustafa Abushagur, thank you for joining us. Distinguished discussants Emadettin, Valeria, Sami, Tarek, Neil, George, Errol, Hakan, Gürkan, Mustafa, thank you for all joining us. Hopefully next year we'll find a vaccine and we can do this all in person, face to face, because I highly doubt this problem is going to get solved anytime soon. It was a pleasure hosting all of you, and thank you for joining us at TRT World Forum.